You can create forms for your web applications using Let's Code Plus. First, you need to drag and drop the form element. So by default, the form element occupies the entire script UI. So you need to change the height and width of it. So we'll change the width to 500 pixels, and we'll remove the height and set the maximum height to also 500 pixels. Sorry, the min height to 500 pixels, or we'll make it 300. And then we can add elements available under the forms category. We can add a text box inside the form. Very much similarly, you can add a date picker, a time picker, and also a switch. So now we already have widgets under the form. So the next thing we need to do is to bind the state variable to the form. So let's create state variable. We'll call the state variable form data, and let's set the data type to object. And once you have the state variable, we can bind the state variable to the form. So the form data will hold the values entered by the user, and we can bind this variable to individual widgets as well. To bind it, select the form element, and then under the form binding property, you can select the form data element. So the form data state variable is bound to the form now. So let's select the text box, and let's change the label to name, and let's bind the subfield of the state variable form data. We'll call it name, and the second text box will change the label to address. Similarly, we'll bind the subfield of the form data state variable. We'll call it address. We'll call it the date picker. We'll change the label to date of birth. We will bind the subfield UOB to that, and we will call it. Now we can bind the subfield of TOB into the component. For the switch, we'll read, and we'll bind the subfield is married to this widget. So after we bind it, we can next add validation to each and every individual component. Using the form validation tool window, you can do that. Let's add empty value validation to all the components. Similar to empty value validation, you can add other types of validation, such as a number that checks whether a number is entered by the user for this particular widget, and you can have minimum and maximum value validation for numbers, and you can have email validation for email fields, and also you can have regular expressions to handle very complex uh, validations. So after you add the validation and bind the state variables to these widgets, now you need to submit the form, validate the form and submit. Oops, it seems that we have dropped it at the wrong location. Using the UI layout tool window, we can fix that. Yeah. Here we name the button to submit, and change few parameters of it. Yeah, under the form also you can change various properties like the label portion. You can change it to top, and you can also set the label width, and you can also say change the form size, control size Let's keep the control size to small. So now let's add a validation event to this. To validate the form, there's a block called validate form under form handling category. Let's select form and let's add a variable. So once the form is validated, the result is stored in this variable is validated. Let's add a if condition here. Set this validated to true. And so the form is validated. And what we can do is that get the form data variable state variable. And for now we'll console log it. Just then we'll save it and run it and see how it's working. So when you click on the submit button, so first it validates the form. As you can see, it didn't validate. Validate form it returned validate form returned false. So name. So as you can see, it is validated. So uh, as you can see, the form data variable have also the data that is entered by the user. So now let's say like if you want to submit the data to an input in the backend, there's a special block called submit form to backend. To do that, you need to first select the form element, and then you need to create a post API here. Let's select the method as post. Yeah, so when it's successfully validated, it will submit it to the post endpoint. So inside the input, you can get the variable in the post variable. So whatever the user has submitted to the backend will be available in the post variable. So what we can do is that we can return the same value to the front end as a response. So let's try and see how it's working. Test. So if you go to the debugger, you can see uh, an API has been called and the response is set to this. So in the API also that we have uh, created the API to return the same data that is sent by the user through the form. So that's how forms are developed.